I want you to think of Cairo in 1324. A caravan enters the city, 60,000 people, thousands of pounds of gold, camels for miles. At the front rides a man named Mansa Musa on his way to Mecca. By the time he leaves Cairo, he will have given away so much gold that the price of it collapses. It takes the Egyptian economy over a decade to recover. This is not a scene from a fantasy. It's in the historical record. And if you didn't learn about it in school, that's not an accident. It's the result of a specific, deliberate choice about which histories get told. Because here's the thing colonial education needed you not to know. The people who were colonized were not living in darkness, waiting to be discovered. They had cities that rivaled anything in Europe, trade networks spanning 3 continents, governments, legal systems, astronomical knowledge, architecture that in many cases surpassed what the colonizers brought with them. This video is about what was here before the ships arrived. Not one country, not one continent, everywhere. Start with the caravan again, because Mansa Musa's story is really a story about erasure. He ruled the Mali Empire in West Africa, a stretch of the continent colonial textbooks were especially fond of calling empty. Contemporary Arab historians described his wealth as beyond description, so vast that modern economists still argue about how to price it. Some analyses put a modern dollar figure near $400 billion. Others say the number is basically meaningless because his wealth wasn't the kind you could convert into today's markets. What both camps agree on is simpler and more useful. Nobody watching him arrive in Cairo had ever seen anything like it. That wealth came from an empire with real institutions behind it. Timbuktu, one of Mali's great cities, held the Sankore complex, a private library culture that scholars are still cataloging today. Tens of thousands of manuscripts on astronomy, law, medicine, mathematics, some of which are only now being digitized before they decay. And Timbuktu wasn't even the oldest seat of learning on the continent. That title belongs to the University of Al-Qarawiyyin, further north in Fez, Morocco, founded in 859 CE, recognized by UNESCO as the oldest continuously operating university on Earth. It predates Oxford by more than 2 centuries. Further along the coast, in what's now southern Nigeria, the Kingdom of Benin was building something most people have never heard of at all: a system of earthen walls and moats surrounding Benin City, constructed and expanded over roughly 6 centuries. Guinness World Records has called it the largest earthworks undertaken anywhere on Earth before the age of machinery, dug largely by hand, generation after generation. Inside those walls, royal guilds cast the Benin bronzes, thousands of brass plaques and sculptures recording the kingdom's history, a visual archive centuries deep. In 1897, British forces burned Benin City and looted the palace, and those bronzes ended up scattered across museums in London, Berlin, and beyond. Restitution fights over them are still ongoing today. And further west, in what's now Ghana, the Ashanti Empire built its own sophisticated state around the same period. A centralized bureaucracy, a gold-based economy, and a body of law and governance structured enough that the British, once they arrived, spent decades trying to dismantle it piece by piece rather than simply walking in. Move east to the Swahili coast, and the story stops being about isolated kingdoms and starts being about a network. Kilwa, Mombasa, Zanzibar, port cities plugged into Indian Ocean trade routes that stretched to Arabia, India, and China. Archaeologists have pulled Chinese porcelain out of Swahili ruins, porcelain that arrived centuries before a single European ship did. Then there's the story that should embarrass every 19th century explorer who told it. When Europeans encountered Great Zimbabwe, a 250-hectare complex of granite walls fitted together without mortar, standing for 1,000 years, they refused to believe the Shona people had built it. They invented theories about Phoenicians, about the Queen of Sheba, about literally anyone else. The denial was never about evidence. It was about what the evidence would have meant. And then there's Congo, maybe the most quietly devastating story on the continent because it didn't start as conquest. The Kingdom of Congo, spanning parts of what's now the DRC, Angola, and Gabon, had provincial governors, a currency, and, this part matters, an early diplomatic relationship with Portugal built on something close to equal footing. The first Portuguese missionaries wrote home describing a kingdom that impressed them. Within a century, that same relationship had been twisted into a slave trade that pulled an estimated several million people out of Central Africa. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It was gradual, and that's what makes it worse. And North Africa needs almost no introduction. The pyramids, Carthage, the Library of Alexandria are taught everywhere, but they're taught as an island, ancient Egypt floating alone in the timeline, disconnected from everything that came after it on the continent. The truth is, there's a continuous thread from Alexandria to Timbuktu to Great Zimbabwe. Nobody draws that line for you, so draw it yourself. When Columbus made landfall in the Caribbean in 1492, he wrote two things about the people he met: that they were gentle and intelligent, and that they'd make good servants. Read those two sentences back to back, and you already know everything that's about to happen. What followed was one of the largest demographic collapses in recorded history. Estimates for the pre-contact population of the Americas range from 50 to 100 million. The range is wide precisely because so many people died so quickly that accurate counts became impossible. Most of those deaths weren't from warfare. They were from smallpox and measles, diseases the population had no defense against, moving faster than any army could. Start where Columbus actually landed, the Caribbean. The Taino people he met first weren't a single scattered tribe. They were organized into chiefdoms called cacicazgos, led by caciques, with a social structure, a ball game culture, and canoes capable of island-hopping trade routes across the entire region. Within a few decades, forced labor and disease had devastated the Taino population so thoroughly that Spanish colonists began importing enslaved Africans to replace the workforce they'd destroyed, a decision with consequences that reshaped the entire hemisphere. Before that collapse, this was a hemisphere of staggering scale. Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, sat on an island in a lake linked to the mainland by causeways, with somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 residents, making it one of the 5 largest cities on Earth at the time, bigger than anything in Spain. It had aqueducts, sewage systems, botanical gardens, a zoo. Cortés wrote to the Spanish king that it was more beautiful than anything back home. Then, he spent 2 years tearing it apart. The Maya left behind one of the most sophisticated writing systems anywhere in the pre-industrial world, an entire literary tradition recorded in bark paper books called codices. When the Spanish reached the Yucatan, a friar named Diego de Landa ordered them burned, later writing that he was destroying things the devil delighted in. 4 codices survived. 4 out of what was almost certainly a vast written tradition. We will never know what was in the ones that burned. The Maya also arrived at the concept of zero independently, developing their own placeholder notation for it centuries before it reached Europe. Though it wasn't the world's first zero, what makes the Maya version remarkable isn't priority, it's that they got there completely on their own, with no contact with anyone who already had. South America had its own scale problem for European chroniclers to reckon with. The Inca, who called their empire Tawantinsuyu, stretched roughly 4,000 kilometers down the Andes, administered by a road network of around 40,000 kilometers, connecting every province to the capital at Cusco. That's not larger than Rome's network, but built through mountains without draft animals or the wheel, it's arguably a harder engineering problem solved. The Inca also ran an economy without money, a system of reciprocal labor and centralized food storage, using warehouses called colca that could feed the empire through a bad harvest. And they recorded all of it, census data, tribute, possibly narrative, in knotted chords called quipu that scholars are still working to fully decode today. North America gets hit with the scattered nomadic tribes myth hardest because that myth is the one that directly justified land seizure. If nobody was really using the land, taking it wasn't theft. Cahokia in the Mississippi River Valley tells a different story. A planned city with platform mounds and a population estimate in the range of 10,000 to 20,000 people around 1100 CE, in the same range as London at the time. Its central mound alone covers more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza. And to the northeast, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy had built a political union of 5, later 6 nations with a lasting oral constitution and a system of checks and balances, a structure some historians argue directly shaped how Benjamin Franklin thought about American federalism, though how much credit it deserves is still debated among scholars today.
And then there's the myth that took the longest to fall, that the Amazon was untouched wilderness, populated by a few scattered, isolated bands and nothing more. For decades, that was the textbook version. Then, starting in the 2010s, archaeologists began flying LiDAR, laser scanning equipment, over the Bolivian and Brazilian rainforest, and it started digitally stripping away the tree canopy on their screens. What was underneath stopped the field cold. The Kasarabe culture had built causeway-linked cities with stepped pyramids, canals, and reservoirs across the Bolivian lowlands between 500 and 1400 CE. At a scale researchers described as a form of urbanism nobody knew the Amazon basin was capable of supporting. Further north, in Brazil's Acre state, enormous geometric earthworks called geoglyphs, invisible from the ground, unmistakable from the air, hint at a network of planned communities stretching even further than what's been mapped so far. The rainforest wasn't empty. It just did a very good job of growing back over what people had built.
Here's where this video gets more complicated and more interesting, because the Middle East wasn't just a place other empires colonized. For centuries, it was the center of the intellectual world. In 9th century Baghdad, the House of Wisdom pulled in scholars from across the known world to translate, preserve, and build on Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge. This is where algebra gets its name, from Al-Khwarizmi, whose work Al-Jabr gave the field its foundation and gave us the word algorithm. While European monasteries were losing classical texts, Baghdad was expanding on them. Centuries later, the Ottoman Empire ran one of the most administratively sophisticated states on Earth, controlling trade routes between Europe and Asia, governing a staggeringly diverse population across 3 continents, and holding that position for over 600 years. And in Persia, the Safavid capital of Isfahan became, in the words of the Persian saying, half the world, a city of blue-tiled mosques and covered bazaars that stunned European visitors who assumed they were the ones bringing sophistication to the region. And here's the story that ties this whole video together. In Cordoba, in Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus, Caliph Al-Hakam II built a royal library, reportedly holding somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of volumes, at a time when a large European monastery might own a few hundred books total. Historians still argue over the exact number, but nobody disputes that it dwarfed anything else in Europe. Cordoba had running water, street lighting, and public libraries centuries before most European capitals had any of the 3. Muslims, Jews, and Christians lived and worked in the same city, translating Greek philosophy back into a Europe that had largely lost it. Then, in 1492, the Reconquista completed itself. The last Muslim kingdom fell, and Spain's Jewish and Muslim populations were expelled or forced to convert. That is the same year, the same monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, who funded Columbus's voyage. Europe's colonization of the Americas and Europe's colonization of its own most sophisticated multi-faith civilization happened back-to-back, funded by the same crown in the same 12 months. This is the part of the story that complicates the whole video's frame. After the Ottoman Empire collapsed following the First World War, Britain and France carved up its former territories between themselves,
drawing borders with straight lines and colonial administrators without much regard for the people who actually lived inside them. Much of the instability the region deals with today traces directly back to those lines on a map. The people who'd spent centuries running one of the world's great crossroads civilizations ended up, within a generation, living inside borders somebody else designed.
Asia gets a strange treatment in Western education. Its ancient civilizations are acknowledged, unlike Africa's or the Americas. China, India, Persia, Japan, these show up in the curriculum. What doesn't show up is what those civilizations looked like at the exact moment colonization started reshaping them. And Southeast and Central Asia barely show up at all. Start with India. At its height in the 17th century, the Mughal Empire governed roughly a quarter of the world's population, and by some economic historians' estimates, generated close to a quarter of global GDP. The Taj Mahal, completed in 1653, remains one of the most technically demanding buildings ever constructed. When the British East India Company arrived, it didn't arrive to civilize an empty place. It arrived to trade with one of the most productive economies on the planet, and it slowly turned that trading relationship into extraction. Economist Utsa Patnaik has put a number on that extraction, around $45 trillion pulled out of India between 1765 and 1938. It's a striking figure, and it's also genuinely disputed by other economists who question the methodology behind it. What's not disputed is the direction. Wealth flowed out of India and into Britain for nearly 2 centuries. Southeast Asia holds one of the most undertold stories in the world, Angkor. Built by the Khmer Empire between the 9th and 15th centuries, the Angkor complex, bigger than modern Los Angeles, was the largest pre-industrial urban settlement anywhere on Earth. It ran on a hydraulic engineering system of canals and reservoirs so extensive that its full scale wasn't even understood until a 2012 airborne laser survey finally mapped what was hiding under the jungle canopy.
Further south, across the water, the Majapahit Empire ran the largest and most powerful state in Indonesian history. A maritime empire based in Java that, at its peak in the 14th century under the minister Gajah Mada, claimed influence over nearly 100 tributary territories stretching from Sumatra to New Guinea. Historians still debate how much of that was direct rule versus a network of tribute-paying allies. But even by the more conservative estimates, Majapahit's trading fleets connected an archipelago larger than the continental United States, with a royal court sophisticated enough that a 14th century court poem describes markets full of Chinese, Persian, and Arab merchants mixing with Javanese nobility. It's arguably the most powerful pre-colonial empire most people outside Southeast Asia have simply never heard of. Central Asia's Silk Road cities deserve their own documentary. Samarkand, under the Timurid dynasty in the 15th century, was one of the great centers of Islamic art and scholarship. Its Registan complex, 3 madrasas framing a central square, was described by travelers of the era as the most beautiful public space they'd ever stood in. And China, quietly, invented the modern world's basic toolkit: paper, printing, gunpowder, the compass, all centuries before any of them reached Europe. When Jesuit missionaries showed up in the 16th century hoping to impress the Chinese court, they quickly learned they had it backwards. Their best pitch wasn't, "Let us bring you civilization," it was, "Let us contribute something useful to yours."
Between roughly 1000 BCE and 1000 CE, Polynesian navigators settled nearly every habitable island across a third of the Earth's surface, using double-hulled canoes and a navigation system built entirely from star pads, wave patterns, wind, and the flight behavior of birds. Modern maritime historians still study it as one of the great intellectual achievements of the species. In Australia, Aboriginal culture stretches back at least 65,000 years, the longest continuously maintained culture documented anywhere on Earth. And it wasn't just old, it was actively managing an entire continent. Controlled burning practices, refined over tens of thousands of years, shaped Australia's ecology and kept catastrophic wildfires in check. When colonization disrupted those practices, that balance broke, and Australian fire authorities are now, belatedly, relearning techniques their predecessors dismissed as primitive a century ago. In Aotearoa, Maori society, descended from Polynesian voyagers who arrived around 7 centuries ago, developed intricate systems of governance through iwi and hapu, an oral tradition dense enough to carry genealogies back centuries, and agricultural techniques that adapted tropical crops to a temperate climate through generations of careful selective breeding.
And on Rapa Nui, Easter Island, stand nearly 1,000 moai, some weighing 80 tons, carved from volcanic rock and moved across the island without wheels or draft animals. For decades, this looked like a mystery. Experimental archaeology has since shown the likely answer. They were walked upright, rocked side to side on ropes by coordinated teams, an answer that required real planning, real engineering, and real social organization to pull off, not the work of a culture people used to dismiss as simple islanders, the work of one of the most capable maritime societies in human history. One more thing about Oceania that rarely makes it into any textbook. Agriculture wasn't invented once, in one place, and spread everywhere else from there, the way most of us were taught, with the Fertile Crescent as the sole starting point. The highlands of Papua New Guinea are one of a small handful of places on Earth, alongside the Fertile Crescent, China, and Mesoamerica, where farming was invented completely independently, with no contact between the two. Archaeological digs at Cook Swamp show drainage systems and cultivated plots dating back as far as 10,000 years, making it one of the oldest agricultural sites anywhere on the planet. People in the highlands of New Guinea were domesticating crops around the same time as, and completely unaware of, people doing the same thing on the other side of the world.
Here's the part that matters more than any single statistic in this video. None of this was destroyed by accident. Taking land, resources, and people required a story in which the people being taken from had nothing worth keeping. That story needed evidence to disappear, so it was made to disappear. Diego de Landa burned the Maya codices on purpose. The British East India Company dismantled Mughal administrative infrastructure on purpose. Belgian colonial authorities destroyed Congo's governmental records on purpose. Residential schools stripped indigenous languages out of entire generations on purpose. And those languages weren't just communication. They were the storage system for everything else: ecological knowledge, astronomy, history, law, memory. What survived is genuinely extraordinary given how hard people worked to erase it. Most of what we were taught about the world before colonization was written by the people doing the colonizing for the purpose of justification. What we're piecing back together now tells a different story. In almost every case, it's more complex, more sophisticated, and more human than the one we were handed. Every place in this video was somewhere before anyone arrived to discover it. The borders on a modern map don't describe the world that existed before colonization. They describe how colonial powers agreed to divide up what they'd taken. Most of the names on that map aren't the names the people who lived there used for themselves. And a lot of the history taught inside those borders today isn't the history that came before colonization. It's the history colonization required. What existed before is still recoverable.
Not completely, because too much was destroyed on purpose for that to be possible, but substantially. It's in the manuscripts, the monuments, the oral traditions passed hand to hand anyway. The archaeological digs still turning up new evidence every year. The world wasn't waiting to be found. It had already found itself, over and over, in 1,000 different ways, on every continent on Earth. That part of the story deserves to be told properly. If this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe. There's a lot more of it.